Civil rights unit here. We're going to take 1965 to current. So the first half, we're going to end in the 60s, and then I'll talk about more modern things as they come about. So here we go. Now, in 1965, as you can tell here, Malcolm X will be assassinated. And there's an interesting story behind this. Malcolm X begins to read into Islam, and he will decide to make a trip to Mecca, which is a pilgrimage that is required by the Islamic faith. When he returns, he begins to preach nonviolence. So the militant mouthpiece, the guy inspiring people to go and do this, has now switched sides. So while in Detroit preaching about nonviolence, members of the Nation of Islam will shoot Malcolm X. So he's shot by his own kind. Kind of, if I can't have you, can't nobody have you. Okay? Now also in 1965, famously, Dr. King still thinks that voting rights are not being met, and so he will announce another march like he did in Birmingham because that was successful, correct? This march was from Birmingham to Selma. All right, there's been a movie made about Selma. So first thing, Dr. King decides he's going to go to Selma. Now the sheriff here, his name was Jim Clark. He will deputize everyday common citizens, many of them members of white citizens' councils, and issue a warning to Dr. King. And that warning was, if you cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge, you will be beaten. And so it's an ultimatum, right? Now remember, everywhere Dr. King went, FBI is there, cameras are there. So on Sunday, he goes and he prepares these people. They have a speech like they've always done. And on Sunday, they will cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Okay? Now, as they crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and as Jim Clark had promised, they were beaten. They were beaten in front of TV cameras, and they were chanting, "The whole world is watching, the whole world is watching." And they were right. Johnson is watching this mainly, okay? Now, one of the key components of this is it spreads. Many other cities begin to have marches saying we march with Selma. And so Johnson has a problem on his hand, and so he decides to pass another important piece of legislation. It is called the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And this did two things. Number one, it ended a literacy test. So we're finally done with literacy tests. Yay. And number two, and probably more important, the federal government can step in if there's a discrepancy or someone saying they're not allowing them to vote, and the federal government can enforce voting laws, which is a unique standpoint. So if you went to vote and they said you couldn't, and they threatened you, you could call somebody in the federal government, and there would be a commission there, and they would help assist you to make sure that you were voting with no problems. Okay? So we've achieved our society goal in 1964 with the Civil Rights Act of 64. We've achieved our political goal, but we have not achieved our economic goal, correct? And so a few weeks after we let people vote, finally, fully, 100%, and registration increases, in an impoverished neighborhood of Los Angeles that is called Watts, we have what are known as the Watts riots in 1965. Now, it started over a routine traffic stop, and they basically came out and said that they were targeting them, etc., and they began to riot, and they have run the police out of the city, more or less, and it's basically mob rule. And what happens in this time is, with no police, they will loot and rob stores, they will burn down buildings. When the firefighters are called in, firefighters have to have bulletproof vests, more or less, because they're being sniped at from rooftops, and ultimately 14,000 troops have to be called into a 35-mile radius city to put down this insurrection, this rebellion. And so this is showing us something, right? And this is showing us that economic civil rights still must occur, all right? And we'll get to that in a second. Now, Johnson will pass Executive Order 11246, which basically kind of went back to affirmative action. Remember, giving priority to a minority because of past injustices. But it actually said you could use what is called a racial quota. And that just means there are spots reserved for people because of their race. All right? So there's that. Now, in 1966, in Mississippi, in Hernando, Mississippi, James Meredith, who is in the middle of a march for freedom, a one-man march, will be shot by a shotgun. Here he is on the middle of Highway 51 here. He's been shot. There is a man as well who was the leader of SNCC, and his name was Stokely Carmichael. And Stokely Carmichael was in Greenville, Mississippi, and he gave a speech in which he said, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. The only way to achieve civil rights is through black power." And he threw his fist up when he did that. Now, he's a member of the Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and his phrase kind of spawns a new wave of militant movements being aggressive in your civil rights. Is that what he meant? No, and I'll get into that in a second. All right? So what is this phrase? It is called Black Power. Black Power is a slogan for the militant move or militant push to gain civil rights. If you remember, Stokely Carmichael is SNCC, and he's the one who gives us the phrase Black Power. Now, he did not mean for Black Power to be this. People dressed militarily, arming themselves, wanting some type of revolution. He did not mean that. What he meant was taking pride in who you are, being proud of being black, which hadn't occurred. If you remember the doll test, it inherently had not been in their genes for many, many years. And so how did you do this? You do this through things that made you unique. And the number one thing that made them unique that they did a ton was growing an afro. And I know that might seem kind of petty or just kind of too small. But remember, this is something that made them unique, made them stand out. So we're going to practice it, okay? Now, also in 1966, the Black Panther Party is started. It's started by 3 former members of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and that is Bobby Seale, Huey Newton, and Eldridge Cleaver. They moved to Oakland, California, and there they met a group of people who were communists, and together formed this radical view of what the Black Panthers were. So what are the Black Panthers? There's 3 things that make them unique. Number 1, they have a communist base. They do believe in everybody having the same, so it does have a communist base, and so naturally, FBI is going to look at them, correct? Number 2, they want a separate society. They want to keep people separate. They believe whites and blacks should not mingle, and so that's kind of a movement there as well. So they want everybody to have the same, but there'd be a white America, black America. And lastly, and probably most dangerously, they believe in a armed revolution, using their weapons, using their influence to kind of change the means. And if you're, Marvel fan or whatever, my nerd range is going off here. There was a superhero created called Black Panther, and he was based off black power and what being proud of yourself could achieve. And that should be coming as a movie here, I think 2017 and 2018. I know he'll play a role in the 2016 Captain America stuff. But anywho, there you go. Now, in 1967, we have another riot. This time is at Detroit. Again, millions of stuff burned, police called out, etc. And it wasn't just Detroit and Watts, but multiple places across this country. And so what happens is they decide, Johnson goes, okay, Otto Kerner, here, I want you to get a group of people together, and I want you to study out what is causing the race riots. And among them, one of the people, by the way, was Thurgood Marshall. And so Otto Kerner is out to answer 2 questions. Number 1, why are the race riots occurring? And number 2, what can be done about it? So, what did they find? They found, and I quote, and this is what I want you to get here, America has created 2 societies. Can you finish the sentence? 1 white and 1 black. So separate but equal has worked. But that's not what we wanted. And the second part of that, what do we do to address this? There has to be better economic things put into place. Okay? So that's a major thing going forward with that. All right? Now, I'll probably stop this one here and pick up with the other stuff here because, I guess not. I can get to this. In 1968, Dr. King will come to Memphis, Tennessee to support a sanitation strike. Now, the sanitation strike, they're garbage workers. It had gone off. It had been a little bit violent, and Dr. King thought that he could make it a peaceful movement. All right. Their slogan was simply, "I am a man." And here you can see the National Guard has been called out. Kind of put on high alert of these different things, right? Now, April 4th, 1968, Dr. King will be shot and killed on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. And here he is right here. Here are his friends, Jesse Jackson, etc. We're doing this. By the way, Al Sharpton, if you've ever heard that name, was the informant for the FBI as to where Dr. King would be going. He said, "I did not know anything about this," etc. And some people have actually claimed that they saw FBI members at the scene. And this is as controversial, I guess, as Kennedy's slaying or assassination, but there it is. Now, they do have somebody arrested for this. His name is James Earl Ray. And so famously what happens is the face of Dr. King and all the stuff has now amounted in this, and people begin to take to the streets and they begin to riot in U.S. cities, and the president goes on TV, and they will not listen to the president. And so famously, the way these riots are put down, right, so that this doesn't keep occurring, is Ralph Abernathy, Dr. King's best friend, goes on TV and begs America, pretty poignantly, if you will, if you do not stop acting violently, you are desecrating the memory of Dr. King. And so after this, the riots will cease. Now, the Lorraine Motel today is the National Civil Rights Museum, and there's a little bit of controversy about that, and I'll move into that in the second video of this, okay? So we're going to finish 68 here talking about that, and then just kind of tie up some loose ends, all right?